The Tide Turns Admiral Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Phoenix Ascendant. Though stood wasn't quite the right word anymore. His feet touched the deck, but he could feel himself existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, aware of every atom in his ship, every thought in his crew's collective consciousness. The 50 years in the void had changed them all in ways that defied explanation. Around him, his bridge crew worked at stations that were part technology, part crystallized thought. Lieutenant Sarah Voss, his tactical officer, moved her hands through holographic interfaces that responded not just to touch but to intention. Her eyes had taken on the same strange luminescence that all of them shared now, the mark of those who had looked into the abyss between realities and learned to navigate it. "Admiral," Sarah said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there 50 years ago, "the Kraxan fleet is moving into attack formation. They're going to test us." Chen nodded, feeling the movement of the enemy fleet like pressure against his consciousness. In the void, they had learned that space and time were more fluid than anyone imagined. Reality was just the most stable configuration of possibility. And for those who had learned to see beyond it, manipulation became possible. "Send a message to Governor Reeves," Chen ordered. "Tell her to prepare for evacuation of the outer settlements just in case. But also tell her that Earth's lost children have come home, and we didn't come alone." The message sent, Chen turned his attention to the fleet connection. When they had first been thrown into the void, each ship had been alone, dying, systems failing as reality itself rejected their presence. But human stubbornness, that trait that other species mocked as foolishness, had saved them. They had refused to die, had held their ships together through pure will until they learned the rules of that strange space. And in learning, they had become something new. The lost fleet wasn't just 43 ships anymore. It was a collective consciousness, each crew member connected to their ship, each ship connected to the fleet, all of them existing partially in normal space and partially in the void they had learned to call home. They could feel each other's thoughts, share each other's strength, act as one organism with thousands of minds. On the Kraxan flagship, Commander Tharkus gave the order to begin the attack. 150 Kraxan destroyers surged forward, their plasma cannons charging to full power. The Kraxan had learned over centuries that overwhelming firepower applied quickly could break any defense. It was a simple strategy that had never failed them. The destroyers opened fire simultaneously, sending thousands of plasma bolts streaming toward the lost fleet. The space between the fleets lit up like a star being born, the concentrated firepower enough to crack a moon in half. Tharkus watched eagerly, waiting to see these ghost ships torn apart by superior Kraxan might. What happened next would be remembered across the galaxy for generations. The lost fleet didn't move to evade. They didn't raise shields in any conventional sense. Instead, space itself seemed to fold around them. The plasma bolts hit the fold and simply disappeared. Not destroyed but relocated, sent sliding sideways through dimensions to emerge in empty space light years away. The ghost ships pulsed with that strange inner light, and reality rippled around them like water. "Impossible," Vex breathed, his scales flickering through colors of alarm and confusion. "Commander, they're not absorbing the fire, they're moving it through space itself." Chen felt the attack like rain against an umbrella, easily deflected by the techniques they had learned in the void. But defense wasn't enough. The Kraxan needed to understand that humanity had changed, had found strength in their destruction that made them dangerous in ways the Dominion couldn't comprehend. "Sarah," he said quietly, "show them what we learned about the nature of distance." Sarah smiled, her hands dancing through the control interface. The Phoenix Ascendant pulsed once, twice, and then wasn't where it had been. Not moved, not jumped, but simply existing in a new location. It appeared in the middle of the Kraxan destroyer formation, reality bending around it like a soap bubble. The ship's weapons weren't plasma cannons or missiles. They were something far stranger. Beams of condensed possibility lanced out from the Phoenix Ascendant, touching Kraxan ships not with destructive force but with change. Where the beams touched, metal became brittle. Systems forgot their purpose. Crew members found their thoughts scattered across probability. 3 destroyers simply stopped functioning, their crews unable to remember why they were fighting or how their ships worked. The Phoenix Ascendant pulsed again and was back with its fleet, leaving confusion and fear in its wake. Tharkus watched 3 of his destroyers drift powerless, their crews sending confused messages about not understanding their own equipment. about memories that seemed to belong to different versions of themselves. His forearms clenched in frustration and something else, something the Kraxan rarely felt. Fear. "All ships full assault," he commanded. "Overwhelm them with numbers." The entire Kraxan fleet surged forward, 500 ships moving as one toward the 43 vessels of the lost fleet. Weapons of every type filled space with death. Missiles, plasma, kinetic rounds, particle beams. It was enough firepower to sterilize a solar system. The lost fleet responded by doing something that shouldn't have been possible. They merged, not physically but dimensionally. The 43 ships began to overlap in space, existing in the same location but in different dimensional phases. They became a single point of impossible density, not of matter but of possibility. The Kraxan weapons fire hit this point and simply ceased, not destroyed but made uncertain, transformed from definite destruction into potential that never actualized. From this single point, the lost fleet struck back. Not with weapons in any conventional sense, but with the fundamental force they had learned to harness in the void. Hope. Human hope. Refined and concentrated through 50 years of refusing to die. Channeled through technology that bridged the gap between thought and reality. Waves of golden light erupted from the merged fleet, washing over the Kraxan ships. Where it touched them, it didn't destroy. It revealed. Every Kraxan suddenly felt what the humans felt. The desperate determination to protect their home, the fear for their children, the love for their world that made them willing to face impossible odds. They felt 20 million hearts beating on the planet below, 20 million souls who just wanted to live in peace. For a species that had built their entire civilization on the certainty of their superiority, on the belief that might made right, it was devastating. They felt humanity's strength not in weapons or numbers, but in their ability to hope when hope seemed impossible, to find light in absolute darkness, to transform destruction into evolution. Commander Tharkas stood frozen in his command sphere, tears running from all four of his eyes. He could feel Governor Reeves's determination to save every life she could. He could feel Admiral Chen's sadness at the necessity of violence. He could feel the colony's children dreaming of futures among the stars. For the first time in his life, he understood that strength wasn't about domination. It was about protection, about standing between danger and those who couldn't defend themselves. "Commander," Vex said, his voice shaking. What are your orders?" Tharkas looked at his tactical display, at his 500 ships facing 43 ghosts that had learned to weaponize hope itself. He thought of all the worlds the Kraxan had conquered, all the species they had enslaved or destroyed. He wondered how many of them might have become something incredible if given the chance. How many unique strengths had been lost to the Dominion's need for control. "Stand down," he said quietly, then louder. "All ships, stand down. Ceasefire immediately." The weapons fire stopped, leaving space suddenly quiet except for the gentle pulse of the lost fleet's light. The 43 ships separated, returning to their individual forms. But the connection between them remained visible as threads of light that linked ship to ship. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main screen again. This time he looked tired but relieved. "Commander Tharkas, thank you. We didn't come here to fight. We came here to protect. That's all we've ever wanted, to protect our own and live in peace. Your ships," Tharkas said slowly. "What you've become, how is it possible?" Chen smiled sadly. "When you're destroyed completely, when everything you were is torn apart, you have two choices. You can accept death or you can choose to become something new. We chose transformation. The void taught us that reality is just one option among infinite possibilities. We learned to navigate those possibilities, to exist in the spaces between what is and what could be. We're still human, but we're also more. We're what humanity becomes when pushed beyond every limit." The gathering storm. The Kraxan Dominion fleet emerged from hyperspace like a storm of metal and fire. 500 warships materialized at the edge of the Horizon Prime system, their crystalline hulls reflecting the distant starlight in patterns that spelled doom for any who saw them. Each vessel was a masterpiece of destruction, built over centuries of conquest, designed to break the will of entire civilizations before a single shot was fired. Commander Tharkas stood in the command sphere of his flagship, the inevitable Victory. His forearms moved in perfect synchronization as he manipulated the holographic displays surrounding him. The Kraxan were not the largest species in the galaxy, nor the strongest, but they had something far more dangerous than size or strength. They had patience, discipline, and the absolute certainty that the galaxy belonged to them by right of superiority. The human colony of Horizon Prime floated before him in the display, a blue and green marble that reminded him of so many other worlds he had conquered. 20 million humans lived on that world, refugees and settlers who had fled from other systems as the Dominion expanded its territory. They had thought themselves safe here, at the edge of known space, far from the main trade routes and strategic locations that attracted conquerors. They were wrong. Commander Tharkus turned to his tactical officer, a younger Kraxan whose scale still held the bright blue of youth. The officer's name was Vex, and he had proven himself capable in 3 previous campaigns. Vex understood that victory was not just about weapons and ships. It was about breaking the enemy's spirit before the battle even began. "Send the standard ultimatum," Tharkus ordered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Give them 6 hours to surrender unconditionally. Tell them that compliance will result in orderly relocation to designated human reservations. Resistance will result in total planetary bombardment." The message was sent, racing through space at the speed of light toward the human colony. Tharkus knew what the response would be. Humans always tried to negotiate, to find some middle ground, to appeal to mercy or logic or even greed. They never understood that the Kraxan Dominion did not negotiate with inferior species. The galaxy had a natural order, and humans were not at the top of it. On Horizon Prime, Governor Elena Reeves stood in the colony's command center, surrounded by her advisors and military officers. The room was quiet except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of emergency sirens beginning to wail across the planet's cities. Elena was 60 years old, with gray hair that she wore pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes that had seen too much war and loss. She had been one of the commanders during the failed defense of New Singapore, had watched as Kraxan bombardment turned a thriving world of 2 billion people into molten glass. She would not let that happen here. "How long until they reach effective weapons range?" she asked Colonel James Park, her military advisor. Park was younger than Elena, but his face showed the strain of the last few hours since the Kraxan fleet had been detected. "At their current speed, 18 hours, Governor. Our defensive platforms might slow them down by an hour or 2, but..." He didn't need to finish. Everyone in the room knew that their 40 defensive ships and handful of orbital weapons platforms wouldn't last long against 500 Kraxan warships. Elena nodded, her mind racing through options that all seemed to lead to the same terrible conclusion. They could evacuate perhaps 100,000 people if they started immediately. But that would mean choosing who lived and who died. They could fight and die heroically, but heroism wouldn't save the children sleeping in their beds across the planet. They could surrender and hope for mercy from a species that had never shown any. "Governor," came a voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a transmission from the Kraxan fleet. Put it through." The ultimatum was exactly what Elena had expected. Surrender or die. 6 hours to decide the fate of 20 million souls. She was about to respond when another voice cut through the command center. This one from the sensor station. "Governor, we're detecting something unusual. Multiple contacts emerging from... I'm not sure what I'm looking at." Elena moved to the sensor station, looking over the operator's shoulder at the display. What she saw made no sense. Space itself seemed to be tearing open in dozens of places throughout the system. Not the smooth transitions of hyperspace jumps, but violent ruptures in reality itself, as if the universe was being wounded. From these tiers came ships, but ships like nothing in any database. They were enormous, some stretching 15 kilometers or more, but they moved with an organic fluidity that defied their size. Their hulls seemed to shift and flow, not like liquid but like something that existed partially outside normal space. They glowed with an inner light that hurt to look at directly, and sensor readings on them fluctuated wildly, as if the ships were there and not there simultaneously. "How many?" Helena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 40, 50, still counting, Governor. They're appearing all around the system. In the Kraxan command sphere, alarms began sounding. Commander Tharkus watched in disbelief as his sensor officers tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Ships were appearing from nowhere, ships that violated every law of physics the Kraxan understood. The tactical displays flickered and sparked, unable to properly track the newcomers. "Analysis," Tharkus barked, his forearms tense with sudden uncertainty. "Unknown configuration, Commander. The ships appear to be They're reading as both matter and energy simultaneously. Power levels are off our scales. I'm detecting human life signs aboard them, but they're changed somehow. Before Tharkus could respond, every screen in the command sphere lit up with an incoming transmission. The face that appeared was human, but like the ships, there was something different about it. The man appeared to be in his 70s with white hair and deep lines on his face, but his eyes held a light that seemed to come from somewhere else. He wore a uniform that looked like Earth military design but modified with materials that seemed to shift and gleam with their own inner light. "Commander Tharkus of the Kraxan Dominion," the human said, and his voice carried a strange resonance, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect harmony. "I am Admiral Marcus Chen of the Lost Fleet. We've been gone for 50 years by your counting, lost in a place between spaces, learning things that shouldn't be possible. We heard our people calling for help across dimensions you don't even know exist. We've come home." Tharkus found his voice. "Impossible. The Lost Fleet was destroyed in the Battle of Kepler Station 50 years ago. Every ship was confirmed destroyed." Admiral Chen smiled, and it was neither kind nor cruel, just infinitely sad. "We were destroyed in a way. The experimental jump drive we were testing didn't just fail, Commander. It succeeded too well. It threw us outside normal space-time, into a place where thought and reality blend, where consciousness can reshape matter, where a determined mind can hold a dying ship together through will alone. We spent 50 years learning to navigate that space, to harness it, to become something new. We're not the fleet that left. We're what that fleet became when it refused to die." The transmission ended, and immediately the ghost ships began to move. They didn't accelerate like normal vessels. They simply were in one place, then another, leaving trails of distorted space in their wake. They took positions around Horizon Prime, forming a defensive sphere that pulsed with dangerous energy. Tharkus watched his tactical display update, showing the new positions of the Lost Fleet. His 500 ships still outnumbered them 10-1, but something in his predator's instincts warned him that numbers might not matter here. These humans had found something in the void, had become something that didn't fit into the natural order the Kraxan understood. "Commander," Vex said quietly, "what are your orders?" Tharkus was silent for a long moment, studying the impossible ships that had emerged from nowhere to defend their kind. The Kraxan Dominion had conquered 50 species, had never met a force they couldn't overwhelm with superior numbers and technology. But this was different. These humans hadn't just survived destruction. They had transformed through it, had found strength in the spaces between reality where no life should exist. "Send a message to all ships," Tharkus finally said. "Prepare for battle formations. If these ghosts want to fight, we'll show them that the living still rule this galaxy." But even as he gave the order, Commander Tharkus felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest. He felt doubt. The Lost Fleet hung in space like a promise and a threat, proof that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers, but their absolute refusal to accept defeat, even when the universe itself tried to destroy them. "The Dominion will send more fleets," Tharkus warned. "Larger ones. They won't accept this defeat." "Then we'll teach them what we've learned," Chen replied. "That strength isn't about conquering. It's about transcending. We've left markers in the void, Commander, beacons for any who are lost enough to find them. Your people, all people, could learn what we've learned. The galaxy doesn't have to be about domination. It could be about elevation, about every species finding their own path to something greater." Tharkus considered this. The Kraxan had spent millennia believing they were the apex of evolution, that their path of conquest was the only way to strength. But these humans had found a different path, had turned their greatest defeat into unimaginable victory. Perhaps there were other paths, other forms of strength the Dominion had never considered. "I will carry your message to the High Council," Tharkus said finally. "I cannot promise they will listen." "That's all we ask," Chen replied. "That and leave this system in peace." "We'll be watching, Commander. The Lost Fleet doesn't just protect Horizon Prime now. We protect all of humanity's children, wherever they are, whenever they need us. We exist in the spaces between, and we can be anywhere instantly. Remember that." The transmission ended. Slowly, carefully, the Kraxan fleet began to withdraw. They moved back to the edge of the system, preparing for the jump to hyperspace. But before they left, Commander Tharkus did something unprecedented in the history of the Dominion. He ordered his ship to send a message to the colony below. "Governor Reeves, this is Commander Tharkus. The Kraxan Dominion formally acknowledges the sovereignty of Horizon Prime and all human colonies. May you find peace among the stars. Then the Kraxan fleet jumped away, leaving the system to its impossible defenders. Elena Reeves stood in her command center, hardly believing what had just happened. The lost fleet remained in orbit, their ships pulsing with that strange light that suggested they were only partially in normal space. Admiral Chen's image appeared on her screen one more time. Governor, we'll stay until you're certain the threat has passed. But know this, we can't stay in normal space for too long. The void calls us back, but we'll always be listening, always ready. Humanity has guardians now born from our greatest defeat. No one will exterminate us. No one will drive us from the stars. We've paid too high a price for our survival to let it be taken away. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. Admiral, the families of the lost fleet, can I tell them? Tell them we didn't die, Chen said softly. We transformed. We became what humanity needed us to become, and we'll always be here in the spaces between, watching over our own. The lost fleet began to fade, not jumping to hyperspace but sliding sideways out of reality, returning to the void that had become their home. But their light remained visible for hours after they were gone, a reminder that humanity's greatest strength had never been their weapons or their numbers. It was their refusal to give up, even when the universe itself said they should.